Something shifts in Landman Season 2, Episode 6, and once it does, there is no going back. This isn't just another tense episode or a temporary spike in drama. This is the moment where loyalties crack, power quietly changes hands, and characters start realizing they may have already lost battles they didn't even know they were fighting. Episode 6 is better than anyone was ready for because it doesn't explode loudly. Instead, it tightens the rope slowly, making every conversation feel dangerous, every decision feel permanent, and every silence feel louder than words. By the time the episode ends, one thing becomes painfully clear. Nothing in this world is stable anymore, and the people who think they're in control might already be too late. Section 1. Episode 6 opens with the consequences of everything that broke in the previous episode finally settling in, and the weight of those decisions hangs heavily over every character. Tommy, for the first time in this series, is no longer standing on solid ground. The man who once controlled rooms with his voice and experience now finds himself being spoken around instead of listened to, and that shift is subtle but devastating. You can feel it in the way Cammy carries herself now. She isn't asking questions anymore. She isn't weighing advice. She has crossed a line where survival has turned into authority, and authority has turned into isolation. Tommy sees it immediately. And that's what makes it hurt more? He understands this business well enough to know that when someone stops asking for your opinion, it doesn't mean they've figured everything out. It means they've decided you're no longer part of the future they're planning. Galino, on the other hand, moves through this episode with a calm that feels almost unnatural. He never raises his voice. He never rushes. He doesn't need to. While Tommy reacts to danger the way a protector does, Galino reacts like someone who already knows how the story ends. He continues positioning himself not as a threat, but as a necessity. Every word he chooses feels deliberate, every pause calculated. What makes him so dangerous in this episode is not aggression, but patience. He understands that power doesn't come from forcing decisions. It comes from standing still long enough for people to walk toward you on their own. And Cammy is doing exactly that, even if she refuses to admit it out loud. Meanwhile, the company itself feels like it's breathing through cracked lungs. MTE Side BX is still standing, but only barely, and Episode 6 makes it clear that survival now comes with a cost that isn't just financial. The legal pressure, the insurance fallout, and the shadow of criminal consequences haven't disappeared. They've simply gone quiet, which somehow feels worse. Cammy believes she's making strong choices, but strength without information is just risk-wearing confidence. Tommy tries to warn her again, not with fear this time, but with exhaustion. He isn't arguing anymore. He's pleading because he knows how these stories end. He has lived them before. He has buried the consequences. And what hurts the most is that Cammy hears him, but she no longer trusts him enough to stop. Cooper's storyline in Episode 6 mirrors this theme of misplaced confidence in a different way. He is trying to convince himself that he is ready for adulthood, for marriage, for responsibility, and for a future that is moving faster than his ability to process it. On the surface, everything looks positive. He has a job. He has direction. He has someone who believes in him. But beneath that, there's a quiet panic forming. Episode 6 doesn't rush this realization. It lets it grow slowly through small moments, lingering looks, and uncomfortable silences. Cooper wants to be taken seriously, but the episode asks a brutal question without ever saying it directly. Wanting responsibility and being capable of handling it are two very different things. What makes Episode 6 so effective is that nothing feels exaggerated. There are no big speeches designed to shock. There are no dramatic twists thrown in just for impact. Instead, the tension comes from realism, from watching people make decisions they believe are necessary, while the audience can clearly see the traps forming ahead of them. Every character is acting logically from their own perspective, and that's exactly why everything feels so dangerous. Because when everyone believes they are right, compromise disappears and collision becomes inevitable. By the end of this section of the episode, you can already sense that the damage being done isn't temporary. These aren't mistakes that can be fixed with one conversation. These are fractures that change relationships permanently, and Episode 6 makes sure you feel every single crack forming. As episode 6 moves forward, the emotional distance between Tommy and Cammy turns into something far more dangerous: silence. And in this world, silence is never neutral. It becomes a weapon. Tommy notices it first in the smallest details. Meetings happen without him. Decisions are already made before he enters the room. Conversations stop when he walks in, not because people fear him, but because they no longer need him. For a man whose entire identity is built on being useful, being necessary, being the one who sees danger before it arrives, this is a slow and brutal unraveling. He isn't fired. He isn't confronted. He's simply being erased, piece by piece. And Galliano is standing right there, calmly filling the space Tommy once occupied. What makes this even harder to watch is that Tommy is still right about almost everything. His instincts are sharp. His warnings are valid. But episode 6 shows us a painful truth about power. Being right doesn't matter if no one is willing to listen. Cammy believes she has finally stepped out of her late husband's shadow, but she doesn't realize she may be stepping into someone else's. Galliano continues framing himself as the only man who can protect her from total collapse. He doesn't argue with Tommy openly anymore. He doesn't need to. Instead, he lets Tommy exhaust himself trying to explain risks that Cammy no longer wants to hear. Galliano understands something Tommy never fully accepted. Fear is more persuasive than logic, and Cammy is terrified of losing control. The episode does a brilliant job of showing how manipulation doesn't always look aggressive. Sometimes it looks supportive. Galliano reassures Cammy that her instincts are strong, that her leadership is necessary, that resistance is just noise from people who are afraid of change. And that's where the damage becomes irreversible. Because once Cammy starts seeing Tommy not as a protector, but as an obstacle, the relationship is already dead. Tommy senses it. You can feel it in the way he holds back, choosing his words carefully, almost afraid that one wrong sentence will push her even further away. But restraint only speeds up the process. The more careful he becomes, the less influence he has. At the same time, Cooper's personal storyline begins colliding with reality in ways he can no longer ignore. The excitement that once fueled his decisions starts turning into anxiety. Episode 6 places him in situations that force him to confront consequences instead of dreams. Responsibility is no longer theoretical. It's present, demanding, and overwhelming. He starts realizing that adulthood doesn't arrive all at once in a heroic moment. It creeps in quietly and asks uncomfortable questions you're not ready to answer. The episode never mocks Cooper for this. Instead, it treats his confusion seriously, making it clear that his struggle isn't weakness. It's immaturity meeting reality for the first time. Tommy tries one last time to guide Cooper through this chaos, but even that role is slipping from his hands. The man who once shaped outcomes now reacts to them, and that loss of control eats at him far more than any financial threat ever could. Episode 6 positions Tommy as someone who sees the storm coming, but is tied down while everyone else sails directly into it. His frustration isn't loud, it's internal, simmering, and deeply human. This is not the Tommy we saw earlier in the season, commanding rooms and solving problems instantly. This is a man realizing that experience does not guarantee authority, and wisdom does not guarantee trust. By the end of this section, the episode has fully transformed into something heavier than a business drama. It becomes a story about pride, fear, and the cost of refusing to listen to the people who care about you the most. Every storyline is moving forward, but none of them are moving safely. Alliances are weakening. Confidence is masking desperation. And the most dangerous part is that everyone believes they're doing what's necessary. Episode 6 doesn't rush toward disaster. It walks toward it slowly, making sure you understand exactly how and why everything is about to fall apart. By the time episode 6 reaches its middle stretch, the pressure becomes impossible to ignore, and every character is now reacting instead of planning. Cammy, fully committed to her path, starts operating with a confidence that borders on defiance. She no longer explains herself, and she no longer feels the need to justify her choices. In her mind, hesitation equals weakness, and weakness is something she cannot afford right now. What episode 6 captures so well is the emotional logic behind her decisions. She isn't chasing power for ego, she is protecting legacy. Every move she makes is fueled by the fear of losing what her husband built, and that fear overrides every warning sign placed in front of her. The tragedy is that the more determined she becomes, the more isolated she grows, and isolation is exactly where manipulation thrives. Galliano's influence becomes impossible to deny in this episode. He doesn't rush Cammy, but he stays close enough to guide the narrative. He reframes problems as opportunities and danger as inevitability. Where Tommy speaks in consequences, Galliano speaks in solutions, even when those solutions are soaked in risk. And because Cammy feels cornered, she chooses the voice that promises certainty instead of caution. Episode 6 makes it painfully clear that Galliano isn't trying to defeat Tommy outright. He's simply waiting for Cammy to stop defending him. And that moment arrives quietly, without confrontation, which makes it even more devastating. Tommy, sensing the finality of what's happening, begins to unravel internally. He doesn't explode. He doesn't threaten. Instead, he withdraws. And that withdrawal is a sign of defeat he never thought he would experience. For the first time, Tommy is forced to consider a future where he is no longer the fixer, no longer the safeguard, no longer the man people turn to when things go wrong. Episode 6 lingers on this discomfort, allowing the audience to sit with it. His fear isn't about losing a job, it's about losing relevance. And for someone like Tommy, relevance is survival. Meanwhile, Cooper's storyline accelerates emotionally. The weight of impending adulthood presses down harder, especially as he is forced to confront responsibility in its most raw form. Episode 6 strips away the excitement of his earlier decisions and replaces it with doubt. He begins questioning whether love alone is enough to carry the future he's stepping into. The episode doesn't give him answers. Instead, it places him in situations where he